Welcome to another Start the Week. I thought that this week, given that we've got so many questions buzzing around in our minds as August continues, we're moving towards the opening of schools in September, and all sorts of other activities and questions are coming into people's minds. People are taking vacation, mainly here in the UK. For those of you who are in your various countries, you know how hard travel is at the moment, so people are having staycations. But the virus issues continue, and lockdown, of course, and that raises questions in people's minds, and it's easy to spend a lot of time mulling over these things. Sadly, the information this week in the United Kingdom is that during lockdown, depression has almost doubled in size in our country, which is very worrying. It's yet another sign of the mental health issues that abound in such odd times as we're facing now. So anyway, I thought this week I'd just read a passage of the Bible that helps us think about the basics. Of course, we've got lots of questions in our minds, and it's easy to forget the simple things of our Christian faith, the practical things that we should be both remembering and doing all the time, not just in these unprecedentedly strange times, but all the time. So this is a reminder of some basic things we shouldn't forget and that we should stay focused on. And actually, talking of mental health issues, it's better for all our mental health sometimes to focus on some positive, practical steps, things we can do something about. Very few of us can affect the trajectory of lockdown, the various issues that arise, the restrictions, the relaxations. We can't control any of that. Certainly can't control the spread or lack of spread of the virus. So it's good for our mental health to focus on what we can control, not what we can't control. And of course, it's right spiritually to be doing these things. So here are some verses from the book of Hebrews, right at the end, where the writer gives us some practical hints for Christian living. Keep on loving each other as brothers, verse 1 of Hebrews 13 says. Brothers and sisters, let's love one another. In the Church of Jesus, there'll be different views on the lockdown situation. Some people will be frightened, some people will be concerned, some people will be rule followers, other people will believe that it's right to break the rules because they think of lockdown as oppressive, perhaps almost immoral in the way that it hurts the poor massively, disproportionately. But in the middle of all that, whatever you do or do not think about all this, the command to love one another is clear. And so let's think today, if we talk to someone on the phone or meet someone in a shop who has a very different view from us, let's remember to be loving and respectful of their views. And then the passage goes on, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, people have entertained angels without knowing it. Well, don't know whether you've ever provided lunch for an angel, but strangers, that's an interesting thought, isn't it? Because social distancing, horrible phrase, has mean that we're frightened of strangers more than ever before. Because instead of them being just a person who's not yet an acquaintance or a friend, this is a person to fear. Perhaps they've got corona, perhaps they don't know it, but they could pass it on to us. So we stay away from them, not just 2 meters physically distanced, which by the way I think is a much better phrase, to physically distance rather than socially distance, but we are afraid of strangers who, how do we know whether they're going to bring disease, even death, into our lives? So society's become much more fragmented in this way. So Christians have to drive that back. Now, it's not always easy to be entertaining. Many people might be frightened to come into your home. During this summertime, perhaps you could entertain them in your garden or outside if they're afraid to come into the house. Certainly, in theory, with the warmer weather of the summer months, we can be more hospitable in open-air spaces than we might have been able to be before, and certainly than we're going to be able to be this winter as it arrives, as surely it must. So this practical hospitality is very important. There are people who are lonely, and afraid. Some have been shielding for months and are just coming out of shielding. How can you express hospitality to them in a practical way, a way that either embraces their boldness or respects their fears, but still hospitality is expressed to them? Then it says, remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. This is a reminder about the pain that's been caused over these last months, and to look out for ways of alleviating that pain. Perhaps you could volunteer to run someone to a hospital appointment. There aren't many of those around at the moment, with the NHS being so seriously dysfunctional, but some hospital appointments are happening, and older people perhaps need a ride to them. That's just a simple, practical way you could care for someone who was suffering. Certainly it's a strange time to be in prison, literally in prison, as this passage implies. In the ancient world, if you were in prison, chances are you might starve to death. Relatives would often have to bring you food just for you to survive. An ancient jail was a grotesquely ugly and horrible place to be. Perhaps there are people actually literally in prison that you could care for. More broadly, there are social sufferings everywhere. Perhaps there are people who are isolated, people in care homes who haven't had a visit for ages and ages and are desperately lonely. Could you call them? Could you send them a postcard? Could you write to them? So this is a passage encouraging us to do practical expressions of Christian faith. And could we contact someone who is shut away in some particularly sad suffering situation that you know about, or you could find out about, expressing practical Christian love? This is good for us too, because it focuses on other people and not just on ourselves. And then it says marriage should be honoured by all and the marriage bed kept pure. Well, marriage has come under some pressure during lockdown because some people have spent more time with their husbands and wives than they've ever spent in their company. Perhaps that's put your relationship under strain. Or perhaps, sadly, you lost your husband or wife just before lockdown began, or even during it, and because of social distancing, you feel more isolated in your bereavement even than you would in normal conditions. So this is a good time to think about relationships. If you're in one, how to strengthen it. If you're not, how to cope with that absence and how to strengthen others who are facing a particular absence in the closest of all possible relationships, the relationship of marriage. And then it says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. This is a good practical thing, isn't it? Because truth is, during lockdown, society has become deeply divided in terms of money. Some poorer families have had to access food banks as never before. Unemployment is rising rapidly and is sadly going to get much worse. People who don't have a job are going to find coping financially very difficult. Mortgages still have to be paid. Children still have to be fed and clothed. Household bills have to be dealt with. So sadness and pain is going to come because of the money issue, the lack of money. And yet, people who are in a job, sometimes here in the UK, these people are referred to as Middle England, people who their job is secure or their pension's secure, their financial situation is largely unchanged, they'll be much, much less affected. Indeed, some people have gained money during lockdown. Where were they going to go and spend it? They couldn't get out to the cinema or the theatre or the restaurant, and so they ate at home and certainly didn't have any foreign travel. So their financial situation improved. So there's great disparity around the issue of money. So if you didn't lose your job, and if you haven't lost money during this period, perhaps this is the time to think about increasing giving from some of that excess income. Perhaps you should be spending it by helping the economy flourish and grow, or perhaps you should be giving to the church more than normally, or to a missionary society or a charity, or in some way reaching out, using your resources in a positive and helpful way, but certainly keeping your life free from the love of money, not being dominated by a fear of financial resources. So do be aware that people are in very, very different situations about money during these times. And if you're one of the very fortunate people for whom money is not a worry, think about how you might express Christian compassion to and for those for whom money is a deep and growing concern, as sadly it's going to be for millions and millions around the world, literally millions, during the coming months of September, October, November, December, and on, sadly, into 2021. And then the passage, this section at least, ends with a promise. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So I can say with confidence, the Lord's my helper, I won't be afraid. What can man do to me? So there's a certain confidence in the gospel because Jesus isn't going to leave us or forsake us. We might be socially or physically distanced from family, from friends, but the Holy Spirit never leaves us. Jesus is an ever present. I know that's hard to feel, just as it's hard to see the air that we breathe. So it's hard to see or sense or feel the presence of Jesus, particularly if we're discouraged or sad. Nevertheless, the truth is for Christians that the presence of Jesus doesn't leave us and he doesn't forsake us and he is with us. And whatever circumstances surround our lives, ill health, good health, financial prosperity, success, failure, impecunious life, and an absence of money, Jesus never leaves us. So we should be confident in that today and rejoice in it. And then, as this conclusion continues, it says that we should remember the leaders who spoke the word of God to us. So this is particularly a good time to pray for your vicar or your pastor, your house group leader, your elder, your PCC member, whatever the church structure you're in is, because many of them, particularly full-time Christian leaders, so-called full-time Christian leaders, the vicar, the pastor and so on, is still wondering what their role is going to look like going forward. What is their job now to do? They don't lead services in quite the same way. They might be Zooming, but not much physically. Even pastoral care is tricky to do. How do you visit someone? You don't know whether they're going to want to visit or be afraid, or how can you express love and affection, and so on. So Christian leaders are often struggling to know how their role is supposed to be happening now that the world has changed in such a dramatic way. It may return at some point to normality, but in the meantime, many Christian leaders are simply confused about what their role now is. And given the overwhelming, grotesque, often unnecessary restrictions placed around public worship, not just by the government, but sadly by denominational leadership as well, and many vicars, ministers are trying to work out on earth to even read through the pages of restraint around them. They don't know what to do, they're confused, and it's leading to discouragement in many. So pray for them today, especially. We've got a pretty difficult task. And then remember, as all this closes out, this simple, single sentence. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So things will change. No one anticipated this pandemic 6 months ago, 7 months ago. It was just not on our radar. Jesus wasn't taken by surprise by it. He is the same as he was before it started. He'll be the same when it ends, whatever that looks like. He is in control still. And just as he was when he walked here on earth, just as he is and always will be, the same reliable, faithful friend. So as you take a few moments today, or in this coming week, to read through these verses in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 through verses 8. Enjoy these practical encouragements to behave like a believer, focusing on others, and to remember that he isn't going to leave you or forsake you, however you feel, because this Jesus, the Jesus we love, the Jesus who lived perfectly, the Jesus who died on the cross for us, the Jesus who raised from the dead and is alive, that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. May God bless you this week.